In this video, we're going to take a look at graphing cosine inverse of theta. So again, we're going to start by graphing cosine of theta. We'll start with our original function that we know and are very comfortable with. So let's do it again from negative pi to 2 pi. Okay, so all the way out here is 2 pi. Halfway would be pi. Halfway would be pi over 2. And then halfway between these two is 3 pi over 2. And that just makes it look nice and uniform. That's why I do it that way. I'm a little OCD. Going to the left, we've got negative pi over 2. And a little bit more, negative pi. And just like sine, cosine exists from negative 1 to positive 1. Unlike sine, cosine starts at 1. And from there, it goes down, down, up, up. And following that pattern over here, it'll go down, down. Okay. So then we've got our nice cosine curve. Okay. Ordered pairs here are 2 pi comma 0. I'm sorry, that's a 1. 3 pi over 2 comma 0. Pi comma negative 1. Pi over 2 comma 0. 0 comma 1. Negative pi over 2 comma 0. And then negative pi negative 1. So we're going to run into the same thing with cosine as we did with sine. And the fact is, this is not a one-to-one function. So in terms of our domain, right now we'll go ahead and say that it's negative pi to 2 pi, but just realize that we're going to come back and restrict it just like we did with the sine function. Our range, still negative 1 to 1. Okay? And this is not a one-to-one function, so we know that we're only going to end up taking a chunk of it. But we got to figure out which chunk we want. So let's go ahead and talk about cosine inverse of theta. And we'll make our table. And we'll switch all our ordered pairs just like we did for sine inverse. So this is going to be negative 1, negative pi, 0, negative pi over 2, 1, 0, 0, pi over 2, negative 1, pi, 0, 3 pi over 2, 1, 2 pi. So we'll come over here, graphing it. Horizontal axis goes from negative 1 to positive 1. Vertical axis, I need to come down to negative pi over 2, 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So we'll start graphing our points. And again, for right now, I'm just going to make these a dashed line because I know I'm not going to keep the entire function. I'm sorry, the entire graph, because it's not a function. Okay? Now, if we tried to do what we did with sine inverse, we just looked at it from negative pi over 2 to positive pi over 2. But if we do that here, you'll see that this piece, it's kind of like a little parabola there. It is not going to pass the vertical line test. So we can't take from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece of the function from 0 to pi. Right? Because this piece of the graph represents a function. It will pass the vertical line test. So our domain for our cosine inverse function is going to be from negative 1 to 1, and our range for our inverse function is going to be from 0 to pi. Now, if we look back up here, if I focus on this graph from 0 to pi, okay, so if I just look at this piece of the cosine curve, would just that piece be 1 to 1? yes. So we'll go ahead and say, all right, our restricted domain for cosine is going to be from 0 to pi.